Good evening. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to our opening event for the Narrative Medicine and Art exhibit, Strips and Needles, A Day in the Life. My name is Dr. Jen Hartmark-Hill. I serve as the Director of Narrative Medicine and Health Humanities. Along with my co-host, the artist and genius behind this exhibit, Dr. Zirulnik, we thank you for joining us in this celebration. I would like to begin by acknowledging the tremendous support from our UA College of Medicine Phoenix teams, including special events and marketing and communications, as well as the many generous contributions from our Department of Bioethics and Medical Humanism and our generous donors and sponsors. During the course of this evening, you can look forward to a guided tour of the exhibition. This will be followed by brief comments from the artist, where he'll share some of his behind-the-scenes insights. We will then hear stories from two individuals also living successfully with diabetes. Finally, we'll move to audience Q&A and conclude by inviting you to share your own story or reflection in the chat. This will be recorded and added to the storyboard to become part of the exhibition space. Now let's head out on a virtual tour of the exhibition with the artist, my esteemed colleague and collaborator, Dr. Michael Lee Zirulnik.
Thanks for joining me on this virtual tour. I'm Michael Lee Zirulnik, the artist of Strips and Needles, A Day in the Life. What we're about to experience is an expression of narrative medicine from the patient's eyes, my eyes. In the United States, 1 out of 4 people live with a hidden or visible disability. Strips and Needles, A Day in the Life represents 366 days of my journey living with diabetes. It's emblematic of the 34.2 million other adults in this country living with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Here, we're presented with a work I've titled Strips and Needles. These 366 lucite panels represent each day from my 38th to my 39th birthday. I used, collected, and cataloged the 3,287 glucose test strips and insulin syringes embedded into these panels. That's nearly 9 tests and shots every day. Standing 6 feet tall, the 12 museum cases represent the months in a year. Stacked within is 1 panel for each day of the month. The story behind this project offers an expanded view of diabetes to show a human dimension of what it is to live with type 1 diabetes while engaging in life's other pursuits. The 366 blocks suggest multiple metaphors. What does it make you think about?
Dr. Zirulnik's perspectives and lived experiences as a patient are exactly the type of focus we endeavor to develop and create space for in medical education and community outreach. As the director of the Narrative Medicine program, I want to nurture value for patient stories and preferences in our next generation of students and healers. I also see the University of Arizona College of Medicine Phoenix as a research leader in bringing new therapies to light to cure diabetes for people affected around the world.
As we round out the exhibition, we're asked, what's your story?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for going on that tour with me, and good evening to those of you joining us from Arizona and from around the United States. And a few of you I know who are up quite early or going to bed late, joining us from around the world. I am so glad to share this moment with you, the opening of Strips and Needles, A Day in the Life, with my collaborator and co-host, Dr. Hartmark-Hill. As I'm speaking, we'll cut to some additional footage to offer a closer look at the exhibit. The number one question that I'm asked most often when I develop work is, what was it that inspired the idea? Where did it come from? And oftentimes I can't answer that question, but I can answer that question definitively for Strips and Needles. It started 28 years ago when I was 12 years old, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I remember vividly in New Jersey, sitting at the dining room table of our home and thinking to myself, wow, there's a lot of medical trash in front of me. And then I thought, how cool would it be if during the fall when the leaves fell, I collected some of them where they often gathered at a curb that came to an intersection at a parking space outside of our home, and then threw my used syringes in there and then did a photo shoot. And then I jumped on the Northeast Corridor line, shoot into New York City, post those photos up on a wall somewhere and stand by while people talked about, is this a drug addict? Is this some commentary on addiction? And I would, in my 12-year-old mind, pop in and say something about diabetes and have that conversation. Well, that never did happen. One, because I was 12. Two, I didn't have a camera. And three, this idea was not fully baked. And it wasn't fully baked until a couple of years ago. Dr. Hartmark-Hill and I sat down and I said, this is what I want to do. And she said, how can I help? And boom, it happened. And here we are today. There's four things that I learned when I was installing the exhibition that you see behind me, and then that surrounds me in the lobby of the University of Arizona's College of Medicine Phoenix campus. What I learned, I think, will stick with me for a very long time. One, during that installation, there was no signage up, and I thought maybe I don't even need signage because people were saying such great things. And students would walk up to me and say, well, what is it? What is it about? And I started answering, and then maybe a half day into the week-long installation, I just said, I don't know. What does it mean to you? A few students said, it's talking about the COVID vaccine and the challenges that some people have with vaccination and those that are okay with vaccination. And that generated conversation and dialogue as I saw students walking away from me. I also heard a gentleman with his colleagues stop by and say, you know, I think about heroin use and how we need clean needles for individuals who are addicted to IV drugs. And he related that to public health and policy in a very clear way. And then three, a student came up to me, introduced himself as a medical student here, and said, well, one, it kind of reminds me of my best friend's dog who has diabetes, and we have to give him shots all the time. And then he continued talking about sustainability. And he looked at this as it was going up and said, that's a lot of waste. And medical waste is a real problem. And there are very wise people thinking about and working on these issues, what to do with medical waste and how to design and develop materials that perhaps biodegrade or are less harmful to the environment, or that can be recycled, because right now most of the waste from my diabetes cannot be recycled. And then lastly, the thing that I heard that was really powerful were the personal stories of individuals who came up to me, a perfect stranger in their place of work and school, and they started to share their own experiences with illness, with disability, family, challenges, and what it meant to them. I think that's the power of the visual arts and the arts in general, is that it creates a conduit, a connecting point in a bridge where people who might not ever have met one another can have a generative conversation. I think those experiences are just beautiful.
You know, Dr. Zirulnik, those are absolutely beautiful and valuable stories that folks shared with you. And those are the types of stories that need to be told. It's truly an honor to do the work to create space that invites and validates those stories. This is core to the work of narrative medicine. Dr. Rita Sharon, one of the founders of narrative medicine in education and patient care, has said that the effective practice of medicine requires narrative competence. That is, the ability to acknowledge, absorb, interpret, and act on the stories and plights of others. Promoting compassionate care and humanism in medicine are core values of the Narrative Medicine and Health Humanities program. We strive to see each patient in the context of their story in order to build therapeutic relationships, connection, and healing. Narrative practice also provides opportunities for health professionals to reflect meaningfully on their own humanity, values, and journeys as lifelong learners in the service of others. Dr. Zirulnik, your thoughts?
Well, I'm, as you know, 100% on board with you there. And I love the work that you do with narrative medicine here and around our community. Before we hear other stories, I'll share just one more behind the scenes insight with all of you joining us tonight. And that is, as you likely know, with works of art, artists oftentimes embed symbolism. And most of the time, none of us know that it's there. But if you know me and you're perceptive and you read the sign in front of the digital media component of this exhibition, which is directly across from me, what you'll see is that that film is on a loop, and it's purposely looped at 7 minutes, 47 seconds, representative of another story and time in my life, which is a passion and love for aviation. And it represents the Queen of the Skies, the 747. Dr. Hart-Markill, back to you.
Thank you for sharing that personal anecdote, Michael. Now let's get a couple of other perspectives from two individuals living successfully with diabetes, their story and response to this exhibit. I would like to first introduce Dr. Aaron Sheets-Freeberger. Aaron has worked at the College of Medicine Phoenix for the past 8 years. Many colleagues are unaware that Aaron has diabetes or that he has been living with it for over 30 years. Being diabetic has never severely impacted his responsibilities at work or in his personal life. However, it has not always been simple. In his late 20s, because of a miscommunication, he was not prescribed the proper insulin. After 3 days, he was hospitalized for DKA or diabetic ketoacidosis, a life-threatening condition. Because Aaron had been in control, his recovery was speedy, but this was a wake-up call that he could be better.
Thank you, Dr. Hart-Markill, and thank you, Dr. Zirulnik. It was an honor to be asked to speak today, and I'd just like to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about my story. I was diagnosed with diabetes on October 22nd, 1990. So that was nearly 30 years ago. I have been living with diabetes, again, for 30 years. My father was diabetic, and I unfortunately caught the bug just like he did, so to speak. I spent most of my adolescent time, just playing like normal with everyone else, except, I would periodically have to stop, come in, check my blood sugar, make sure that I had to eat something or have some juice if I was going low, or in a lot of cases, my blood sugar was running a little high. So, my grandparents would go tell me to run around the block or play with traffic, whatever really worked out for us. I feel that this is monumental. I haven't ever experienced anything or haven't seen something like this before. And when I was meeting and talking with Dr. Zirulnik over the course of the past year, it's just a wonderful experience to see this brought to fruition. And I am just blessed that I was along for the journey. So thank you very much for letting me come share my story. And I look forward to continually, trying to keep myself in tip-top condition to deliver these wonderful events for the College of Medicine of Phoenix. Thank you very much.
Aaron, thank you so very much for sharing your story. We certainly appreciate it. Well, with that, I'm not sure if we have our other special guest that's going to be able to join us.
Dr. Zirulnik, we do. Dr. Harmon is on the line.
Beautiful.
Dr.
Yes,
Harmon,
hi.
thank you for joining us this evening. We would be very honored if you would introduce yourself and tell us your story.
I'd be happy to do that. My name is Mitch Harmon. I'm the chief of the endocrine division over here at the VA hospital. I've been doing medicine for about 50 years. I'm 78 years old, and I'm still working full time. And like Aaron Sheets, my diabetes story is a family story because I'm the second that I know of in 4 generations with diabetes. My father was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 56 or so. And it was assumed that he had type 2 because, after all, he was in his 50s. So he was given some metformin and told to be a good boy and eat a healthy diet. And 3 months later, he went into diabetic ketoacidosis because what he had was what's called late onset or latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood, LADA. And it turned out that in our family, when he recalled the family history, he had a 17-year-old cousin who died of type 1 diabetes because insulin hadn't been invented yet. First cousin. So what we have in our family is actually type 1. And I did not become an endocrinologist because my dad had diabetes, nor because I had diabetes, because I didn't develop it until about 10 years ago. I guess maybe 14 years ago now. But again, late onset type 1. My son, my youngest son, developed diabetes at the age of 5. And his daughter, my granddaughter, at the age of 6. So I have experienced diabetes as the child of a father with diabetes, as diabetes, dealing with it myself day to day, and then as a parent. And I can tell you, I don't know if anybody that's listening is the parent of a patient with juvenile diabetes, but it is a life-changing and grief-inducing experience. One has the feeling that somehow I've failed this child. I should have been able to prevent this. What can I do to make it better? No child should be stuck with diabetes. And now I'm helping to raise a granddaughter who got it at age 6 and is now 13 and still is having trouble coming to terms with it. 13-year-olds want to be like everybody else. They don't want to have diabetes. And it affects what you can eat. You have to go to the nurse's office at school when you're, feeling bad. She has to, it's just, living through the same thing that I did with my own son and now with my granddaughter. So diabetes is something that you can live with, but it's life-changing, it's life-altering, it's something that you need to pay attention to. And I can say that if there's a bright side to it at all, it's the fact that it does give me something in common with patients that I'm trying to help manage their diabetes, because when they realize that I'm dealing with some of the same issues, I can sometimes get them to listen to me in ways that um, a doctor who doesn't understand diabetes from the inside can't do. So that's kind of my story. I about half the patients I see in clinic have diabetes, and so it's sort of okay. I'm one of you. You're one of us. Um, it is helpful in some ways. The other thing, though, that struck me about Dr. Zirulnik's exhibit is that it's really historical, in the sense that the technology for managing diabetes has moved on way beyond strips and syringes. And I think that that's something very important, and that, those of us who have the disease or deal with the disease really owe the folks who spent years and a lot of thought and a lot of money. And obviously there was a profit motive there too, but I know, some of the people that were involved in developing the modern diabetes technology, and I can tell you that there was more involved than making bucks. In many cases, they're people who themselves have family with diabetes or are themselves patients with diabetes, and 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 they were dedicated to improving ways to manage this disease. So now we have constant glucose monitors. This is a transmitter. I mean, tiny, right? And it talks to my cell phone, and my endocrinologist can tune in and see what my blood sugar is anytime, because my cell phone is uploading every 5 minutes my blood sugar to the web, to the cloud. So, and then that's an insulin pump. I happen to have been a resident in the Department of Medicine at Yale just about the time that the very first insulin pumps, which, constant infusion of insulin, were being developed. And it was a backpack that weighed about 25 pounds with a Harvard pump and all kinds of instrumentation that you had to carry around. And now this is a device with a chip. It calculates my dose. It doesn't pile up thousands of syringes over a year. It's, a very different experience from the experience of previous generations. And I think that the technology is just going to keep getting better. So having diabetes is not great, but compared to what it was 20 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago, or in 1918 when my father's cousin died, it's a very different situation. So we have, a lot to be grateful for.
Indeed, I will echo those words. Thank you so much for sharing your very humanizing story and the really wonderful ways that you're able to connect and build therapeutic relationships with your patients. So for all of you who are on the line listening, we're just opening up the chat where you're welcome to ask questions. In the time we have remaining, we will field as many as you can, and you can direct those questions to any of our panelists. I do see a comment in the chat that someone has shared, and I'm going to read it because I think it's very meaningful. Someone wrote, "I wish my father would have had that available to him, especially with the onset of dementia combined with his diabetes." Absolutely. And Dr. Harmon highlighted some of the advances in medical technology. And of course, we look to a future where technology and medical science improve lives more and more. And hopefully someday we will see a cure in response to the hard work of many researchers over the years. I'm seeing a lot of praise in the chat. Amazing words, Dr. Harmon. Thank you so much. What a meaningful presentation. There is a question, and that is, what is the most difficult part of living with diabetes? And I want to direct that to all three of you who've spoken and shared their stories, because you all have unique perspectives. So Dr. Zirulnik, let's start with you. What is the most difficult, what has been the most difficult part for you living with diabetes?
I rarely think of it as difficulty, and I think the way I've processed it is really to think about it as a gift and allow me to develop and move forward. But if I were to pick one thing, it is that I always had and still am a fan of sweets. And so maybe it has saved me there as well, because I certainly can't eat as much as I would like to. Dr. Harmon, I will pass it over to you.
Okay. Well, like you, I don't really think of diabetes as terribly difficult, especially given all of the wonderful technology that we have now that makes it easier to manage. I think for me, the issue is you always have to pay attention. It's something that's sort of with you at a subliminal level all the time. You can never forget that you've got to take your insulin when you eat, that oh my gosh, I'm feeling really hungry. Am I developing hypoglycemia, or am I just hungry? So it's sort of this thing that's, it's not, a tragedy. It's not a disaster. It's just that you never get away from it. It's always with you. And if you don't pay attention to it, it's going to bite you.
Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Sheets-Freeberger, back to you. What's been the most difficult part of living with diabetes for you?
Really for me, in the beginning, it was the carb counting and, trying to understand, okay, so my blood sugar is this, and I have to add, so many units and, well, am I going to be doing any exercise? It's really an art form, you just kind of, get that together. So, I generally just started really trying to listen to my body and understand, like, what, okay, my blood sugar is this, but what am I going to be doing next? And so that was always the difficult part for me. I, like Dr. Harmon, have a insulin pump. So, just trying to, get that right mix of food, insulin, and exercise to, maintain your blood sugar is by far the most difficult part of being diabetic.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we have covered the questions that are in the chat, but I hope that all the participants and then our panelists who've shared their wonderful stories take a moment to see all the praise that's been added. So really wonderful words of gratitude for the work that's been done. Now, at this point, we want to open it up and invite you to share your own story, response, or reflection here in the chat. Whether you live with diabetes, you love somebody who does, you support them, they're your neighbor, or just any of your responses at all. I like to think of this as, whether you have lived experience living with a hidden disability, or you're responding, growing, learning from this exhibit real time. This is part of your story right in this very moment. Please do feel very welcome to share with us your response, your story in the chat. If you would feel more comfortable, you are welcome to email Dr. Zirulnik. And we're going to put his email in the chat because we are going to collect your responses, whether they come in through the chat or they come in through email, whatever is more comfortable for you. And we want to add them to the storyboard. Now, stories over 3 sentences are going to be edited down to size in order to make everything fit. But please, we welcome you to be part of our living exhibit and contribute to that space and welcome more and more stories. So as folks are considering what they want to share and their story, we're actually going to cut to some additional programming that's coming up around this. Thank you for joining us in this inaugural event. We will have a number of additional speakers and events to further explore and advocate for awareness on behalf of patients and the current science around diabetes. And so you'll see some of the upcoming events. Please share these with your family and friends. Please bring friends back when you attend upcoming events. We really welcome you to this conversation. So finally, in conclusion, we want to again thank our generous supporters and donors. You have made this possible. We are very grateful to you. We look forward to seeing you at future events. And until then, be well.
Thank you.